Oh, very good morning. Myself, Dr. Ravi Kumar Poluru. Today's topic is pragmatic antigraphs. So till now we have discussed management antigraphs. We know that management antigraph is mainly used for to investigate the business use cases, and they need to implement the work breakdown structures. It means if you are taking the large amount of complex of data, so they need to divide and conquer. So they need to divide the component into sub-components, and these sub-components has to be assigned to the developers. So after completion of the work, they need to club into a single unit. So by doing this, the complexity of the work will be minimized. So that's why the work breakdown structure is very important to minimize the complexity with the help of WBS. Today we are going to discuss pragmatic antigraph. So what is meant by pragmatic antigraph? So pragmatic, or we can call as programmatic antigraph, is nothing but here if you are having a problem, so that problem has to be solved with the existing solutions. That is, we can call as the pragmatic antigraphs. So mainly here the pragmatic antigraph is consisting of documentation. With the help of the documentation only, so this pragmatic antigraph has to be scrutinized in each and every process or phases. Now we'll see how these pragmatic antigraphs will be implemented in the organizations. First one is the conventional document driven. So this conventional document driven is mainly applicable for the organization to verify what is the amount of engineering type on developing, polishing and formatting, reviewing, updating and distributing this documentation. So they need to allocate the time for each and every process or the phases. So by doing like this, the documentation will be playing the very important role for the each and every process, or we can call as the phases. That's why they need to check that what is the main reason to apply this documentation in the process. First one is no rigorous engineering methods. So there is no any technique or the engineering methods or languages for the implementing in the requirement specifications or design. So mainly they're depending with the paper documentation. Paper documentation is very important for using the ad hoc text and graphical representation. So this paper documentation mainly they're using the things in a proper manner. Whereas in the electronics, we may modify or update the content in the electronics. But if you're having the original documentation, and if you want to write the content, so what they will do is they will write the content in a proper manner. So that's why the paper documentation will be playing very vital role in the organization. So most of the stakeholders, they will be insisting to the managers to have the paper documentation compared to the electronic documentation. So here in this paper document, mainly it will be consisting of text as well as the graphical representation. It is in a default format. So there we can use the content, or we can represent the textual or diagrammatic or the architectural content in the paper documentation. And the second one is, so they need to choose the language which will be implementing the coding part or the implementation part and the deployment. So whereas in the deployment, they need to check that extremely cryptic and that should be a highly unstructured. Okay, so here they need to choose correct programming language for implementing in the coding part. Okay, for example, if they're considering the C programming or the Fortran, if they're taking these programming languages, okay, for doing the project, here it will be consisting of source of line code is very high here. okay, or we can call as the LOC, line of codes. In the C and footer, it will be consisting more number of source line of code. So that's why they need to choose proper conventional programming language for implementing the code in the project, as well as the deployment of the very extremely cryptic as well as the highly unstructured. Okay, so mainly the cost and time will be impacting for the choosing the programming language. So here in the pragmatic artigraphs, mainly when they are going for the software structure and the behavior, they need to choose some reviewers, okay, who are expert in the particular domain reviewers. They need to verify the testers who are having the more knowledge on the testing and maintaining the products. So like they can have the programming language and the finding the bugs and managers. So this will be very playing very important role. By means they can have the good uh, giving the good review comments, okay, for what they are doing the paperwork, the documentations, and also having the human readable formats. They should be have in the human readable formats. So these experts will be review the paper very clearly, and also they need to progress the software very credible as. So document is nothing but we can call as tangible. Okay, so what do you mean by tangible? So tangible is nothing but here it will be the sense, okay, and we can touch. Okay, so paper is an tangible, so we can take the paper and we can sense and we can touch the paper. But misleading mechanism for demonstration progress. In the sense here, when you're having the paper documentation, we cannot give the clear demonstration of the what the work we have given. Okay, that's why we require some electronic documentation. So compared to the paper documentation, so documentations can be how in the two ways. One is paper documentation and another one is electronic documentation. So in the paper documentation, we can call as an tangible, whereas electronic is an intangible one. Okay, so this paper documentation, so there for the demonstration progress, we need to verify each and every paper. So whereas in the electronic demonstration, we can see the content, we can see the information, what they have done the changes in the electronic. Okay, the next domain is nothing but here some domains they may have the document driven and it will be degenerated over. It means in the past 30 years, so mainly they will be having only the paper documentation. So best example, if you are saying the before 2015 like that, so mainly in the government or any sectors, we can have only the paper documentation. So for example, if you want some certification, so what we have to do means, so we need to roam each and every office and we can get the certificate. So it will take more time, but nowadays we are having the electronic. So we need to approve the what are the things they required, and so within the 15 or 30 days we'll get it the certification. So here the main difference between the paper document and the electronic document means we can save the time here. Okay, so but in the last 30 years, what they are for improving the process, they're taking the major obstacles. Means they need to scrutinize each and every paper. So it will take more time to verify and to inspect the things, to modify the things in the paper documentation. So that's why the quality of the documents became more important. So nowadays, if you are going for the inspection like NBA and NAC, so mainly what they will do means they will see the paper documentation compared to the electronic documentation, because the paper documentation will clearly tell that so these are the original and have the correct information of the documents. So then the quality of the engineering information, so they represent. So that's why the quality of the documentation is very important compared to the engineering information. So mainly they need to check that the documentation of the quality should be very having the more quality compared to the engineering information. And how this can be evaluating. So for this evaluating, they require the human. Okay, because human can check or peer inspect. So for this one, peer inspection is very important for organization, because in the peer inspection, the senior members will sit in the review meetings, okay, and they will be going to inspect each and every data. So they can have the hardware related as well as the software related data. So while inspection, if any issues will be raised, these senior members will give the suggestions to the people. So, and also when you are choosing the peer inspection team, they should have the sufficient knowledge on that particular domain or subject. Because, for example, if you are considering, okay, so if the reviewer don't have the adequate knowledge on the particular domain like machine learning, okay, if you don't have the particular knowledge on the machine learning, and if you're the editor will giving the papers for review, so he cannot give the proper reviewer comments, or sometimes he may reject the paper. Then the time and the quality of the paper will be decreased. So that's why mainly those who are inspection or having the reviewer, they can have the highly subjective knowledge. So when they're having that subjective knowledge for that particular domain, so we can get the quality of the papers, that particular gender. If the person is not having the adequate knowledge and is trying to review the paper, he may give the rejection or he can give the acceptance of the paper. So then the quality of the journal paper will be degraded when the paper is not clear. So that's why for inspecting the reviews, they may be see that they can have the clear idea of the subject and the quality of the domain process, and they can have some efforts checking that whether it is having the single dimension, two dimension or multi-dimension issues. So mainly if it is a single dimension surface issues, we can easily minimize that particular issues. If you are having the multi-dimensional issues, so there we need to check the different types of the design or the architecture quality issues, such as the performance and the adaptability. Okay, so mainly in the design and the quality. So in the architecture part, how we are going to check that this data having the more performance means based upon the consistency and the completeness. So based upon the consistency and the completeness, we can say that the architecture is having the high quality. If you are not providing the consistency and the completeness, then we can say that the performance is degraded. So that's why. So when you are checking some multidimensional issues, we need to verify the performance and the adaptive. Compared to this performance and adaptivity, we can check that consistency and also the completeness. So this is also very important for checking the multidimensional issues. So there we can have the what is the quality of the architecture for this project. And next one is the documentation production cycles. So cycles can be having the different phases like documentation production, review cycles and update cycles. So these can be how the snapshots in the schedules. So scheduling is very important. So for example, for the review of the projects, so every quarterly of the half-yearly, if you are inspecting the review papers, so they can get the more quality of the project. Okay, so here the document production cycles and review cycles and update cycles will be playing very important role for progressing the schedule. So that's why they are going to check that. So what is the schedule dependency and having the synchronization between the different types of the cycles. So they have taken the scenario where large defense project. So previously in olden days, what they will do means they're going to spend more time for the design document and delivering the document to the customers for reviewer and waiting some months for getting the comments back and taking some months for responding to the comments and incorporating the changes. So it means if they're considering 5 years, so it may not take the 5 years, it may take more than 5 years. I means, so it is in a paperwork. So they need to respond in a proper stipulated time here. So they need to wait a long time to complete the project. So that's why they need to check that different criteria to minimize the time here. So here many multiple month document review cycles to be managed. So when they are considering the paper documentation, so they need to have the different types of the cycles to manage, schedule and synchronize. So that's why what they have to do means they need to check that what is the alternative way to minimize the time and the cost here. So this electronic documentation is very important to minimize the time and the cost, because instead of sending the documentations to the in-person, so what they will do means they can have the online reviewers. So this can be minimized the time here. And here the lengthy and highly detailed documents. Okay, so here they need to verify that what is the lengthy and highly detailed documentation, and also they need to demonstrate more progress. So the demonstration is very important, and they need to minimize the scrap and rework. If the scrap and rework is increased, then the cost also will be high here. So the ultimate goal for the any organization or the MNC companies is to minimize the scrap and the rework. So it will be affecting to the life cycle also if the scrap and rework is increased. So that's why they need to verify that to minimize the scrap and rework. And the more effective approach is the documentation efforts to improving the rigor and understandability. So here what they will do is to minimize the time here. So instead of the offline review, they will send the online review. So this online review is playing very vital role here. They can have the smart browsing and some navigation tools. So this online review will be saving the time. Okay, so instead of spending more months, so this can be how only the days or the weeks can be scrutinize the content and they can give the reviews. So with the help of the online review, the time will be minimized and also eliminate a huge and productive source of scrap and rework. So here we are saying that paper documentation will be considering more time here. So when we are going for the online review, so there we can minimize the scrap and the rework process. And also this online reviews can be allowed for the continuous review. So why we require this continuous review means this can be minimize the issues. Okay, so when you are going to update some modifications, when again we are trying to send this content to the online reviewers, this will be minimize the more issues here. Okay, that's why the online anti-crafts is very playing the impact to the organizations. Some issues will be happen here. The first one is people want to review information but don't understand the language of anti-crafts. For example, if you are considering, as I told that here, example 1. So if the reviewer don't have sufficient knowledge on the particular domain or language, and if you are sending the paper to the reviewer, he cannot understand the what is the content written by the scholars or the students. So what he will do means he don't know how to what are the contents placed in the journal papers. Sometimes they may chance to give the rejections or they may give the acceptance. The paper is good, there is no problem. The paper is not good, and if the reviewer is going to accept the paper, then the quality of the journal will be decreased. So that's why what they'll do means first they need to they need to identify the correct reviewer, means who are having the more knowledge on that particular engineering knowledge. So we need to assign the papers or the reviewers to that particular reviewers. So it is not common to find people who react. For example, if the particular person is not having the adequate knowledge on the UML, he cannot learn the UML language for that particular paper or the process. So that's why what they will do means they can check that is there any flowcharts and the result sections and some text. Sometimes the text can be very helpful for the reviewers to understand and to give the review comments. So that's why here mainly for the reviewers they require some adequate knowledge to understand the things which are written by the people or the customers. And would we respond to a similar request by someone reviewing the engineering blueprints? So mainly we need to check that blueprint is nothing but the architecture or the design part. So there we cannot have that sub. So what we have to do means we need to check that reviewer will be the knowledgeable. They need to understand the some engineering notations. Okay, and they should have the some discipline on the engineering discipline to check the information is correct or not. If not, it will be impacting the time and the cost. So that's why. So when you are assigning any work to the reviewers, you need to check that the reviewer having the sufficient knowledge on that particular domain or the programming language. The next one is people want to review the information but don't have the access to the tools. Okay. So for example, if X person is a reviewer, he is the reviewer. He is very eager to review the papers. But if this reviewer don't have access the tools means he cannot check that what is the quality of the paper. So what he has to means he has to request the tools who are assigned this paper. So based upon the tools, when he is accessing these tools, so he will be very rigorous to give the comments in a proper manner. So that's why in any organization, once they are going to start the project, they need to have the fully tools or full developed tools has to be implemented by the organization. And also sometimes some stakeholders will be insisting to have the review through online. Some stakeholders will be insisting to take the reviews offline only, like paperwork in the electronic paper. Okay, so here some organizations are having the paper documentation. As I told that here some standard formats will be there. We have seen that starting. So they are using the UML and Visual Basic VB and also C++ and ADA 95. Why they are using this programming language? So VB, C++, ADA 95 will be minimizing the source line of code. Okay, when source line of code is minimized, then the cost and the time will be minimized. So this programming language will be morely impacted for minimizing the cost, and they can use the reuse concept, object-oriented concepts with the help of this C++, okay, and ADA 95 and the Visual Basics. So whereas UML is mainly used for the engineering notations. Okay, this will be having some visualization tools and maybe used for the web or rapidly. These stakeholders are electronically to change the information through online. So that's this will be very impacted to the stakeholders and the customers as well as the developers to minimize the cost and the time here. And also here, if they want to develop the optimal software development, so they need to check that what are the main tools which will be impacted. So before going to implement the project, the management has to be taken the acceptance from the stakeholders, because sometimes the stakeholders cannot accept the what are the tools which are using by the management. So before starting the project, they need to take the acceptance from the stakeholders. And the next one is human readable engineering articraft should be rigorous notations that are complete, consistent and used in self-documenting manner. Okay, so human readable engineering articraft means when they are using some notations, the notation should be a complete and consistent. For example, if the person is using the abbreviations, okay, and if I'm not providing the full form of that particular abbreviations, then if I read that paper, I cannot understand what is the full form of that particular abbreviations or the acronym. So that's why when we are writing the thesis or the paper, first what we have to do is we need to write the abbreviations and acronyms for that particular sentence or the word. So should be in the English sentence and should be understood by all the readers and should not be any jargon. So that's why when we are reading the content, it should be a complete and consistent and also should be a self-documenting manner. There should not be any jargon in the writing the contents or using the components. So here English words should be used for all identifiers and the descriptions. So that's why when you're writing the paper, there should be the English sentence, and when they're using the acronyms and abbreviations should be used only where they are well accepted, and they need to minimize the jargon. So there should not be any clumsy when they're writing the documentations or the thesis or paper. So because if the human is not understanding what they have written, so it cannot be acceptable. So that's why no matter what the tools or the languages they use, so they need to abbreviate. So that's why, so when writing the documentation or the thesis, so they need to write that clearly. They should not go for to save the keystrokes. Okay, so here saving the keystrokes through abbreviations means if I start writing the paper without writing the full form of the acronym of the abbreviations, I can save the keystrokes. But for the other people, they cannot understand what are the full form, what is the sentence of that particular content. So that's why to minimize this, so it should not be clumsy or to reduce the errors. What you have to do is we need to write the proper manner to understand by the human being, and also allowing these practices. Okay, so should not use this acronyms, abbreviations. So wherever we require, then only we need to use this acronym or the abbreviations, or else the productivity and the quality will be degraded. So that's why we need to check that software is written only once. We can write the software code only once, but read many times. That's why the documentation will be having very important role, because so we are going to check the documentation of the user manual many times here. And the software means we can see the contents. Okay, we can execute. But whereas the documentations, we are going to check the content very clearly. Therefore, the readability should be emphasized. So that's why when you're writing the sentence or the documentation, we should use the proper English words. So that should be accepted by the engineering handicrafts. If not, so this cannot be accepted by the more human beings or the readers, or they're not eager to review your papers. Okay. Nowadays, compared to the paper documentations, mainly we are getting that paperless reviews. It is online, electronic. So there we need to check that more rigorous notations and to minimize the errors. And the next one is useful documentation is self-defining. So that's why the documentations will be having the very vital role here. Self-documenting is right to work, and also the engineering notations, they need to write the separate documentations. So they need to have the test procedure, how this can be performed. The components can be performed in a proper manner, and they need to have the information in a particular documented. So they cannot be produced what they not. Means they should be eliminate the unnecessary data, and they need to improve the self-documenting nature. Okay, so this is the main technique. Okay, and paper is tangible. Electronic handicrafts are too easy to change. Okay, so here if you are considering the paper it can be sensed. So we can touch and we can sense the paper. Whereas the electronic, so we can only see the content. But compared to the paper in the electronic, so online we can see the things and we can change it very effectively and easily. Whereas in the paper we cannot change. So if you want to modify the sentence, what you have to do, we need to strike off or we need to replace the paper. So more modifications will be seeing that some clumsy of the things. So that's why the electronic antigraphs is very easy to change. Some stakeholders will be preferring the paper documentations. Some stakeholders will be preferring the electronic documentation, because sometimes the paper documentations will be playing very important. Why means this is the main proof to submitting to the stakeholders or the end users. Okay, some stakeholders prefer paper documents. Is that once they are delivered, they are tangible, static, and persistent. So once we are transmitting the information, so that is in a tangible, it is in a static, and we cannot change the things. So whereas the electronic online, we can change the content whenever we require. So that's why stakeholders sometimes they will prefer paper documentation compared to the electronic documentations. So the online and the web-based artigraphs can be changed easily. So we can change whenever we require. So whenever we are finding some difficulties or some modifications, we can change to the online. But whereas in the paper, so once we have submitted, we cannot modify. So here, that's why electronic antigraphs will and should met with healthy scrutiny by many stakeholders. So that's why the stakeholders mainly they will be taking the online or the electronic documentations. Some stakeholders will be preferring paper documentations. Okay, so the main advantages are substantial and far-reaching across many domains. So we can submit the paper documentations throughout the world here. So we can have some tools and environment so that based upon the changes, so we can have some audit and electronic signatures. Okay, whereas in the paper, so if any modifications are there, then we need to hand out that paper and we need, so there we need to change the modifications and again we need to submit to that particular stakeholder. So it will be taking more time. So whereas electronic we can submit if any modifications will be happen. So we can modify changes through online and by placing the electronic digital signatures. So this will be very easy compared to the paper. So the pragmatic antigraphs, so they can have paper as well as the electronic documentations. Okay, so those can be tangible and intangible one. Okay. So these are the references. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.